Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. Mr. Terry, as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on the internet. Alright, today's video comes from our awesome patrons over at Patreon. And they kind of followed up on the previous week, and that they wanted to see more history bombs. So earlier, I watched the History Bombs song. It was a song, a rap about World War One. And that was pretty cool. I thought it was enjoyable. It was well shot, well produced. I was really impressed. And then I saw that they have one on the Cold War, and people were recommending that to me too. So this one out this week in this week's Patrons Pick Poll, and we're going to check this out. If you'd like to get involved in the polls, you can start by going down below in the description, click on the Patreon link, and that'll take you, and any tier level gets you access to that, as well as Discord benefits and things like that as well. All right, before we begin though, the original video link is down below. Make sure you go over there and support History Bombs by checking out the original video, subbing, liking the video, those sort of things. And thank you for subbing and for liking the video here today. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Bombs Classroom, award-winning online resources for history teachers. Sign up today at historybombs.com. Now, enjoy the film.
For me? Oh my gosh, we gotta check that out.
Sir, that's the fifth one today. The same identical message. 2 history bombs, do the Cold War in one take? But what does it mean?
History bombs, huh? It's gotta be the Russians, that spy network. Maybe something to do with the Manhattan Project. I gotta take this to the president.
Guys, I've got this.
Who's that guy?
Pass me the mic.
Oh, that's the guy
So
from last one.
There would be peace after World War II. How could you be so naive to believe that we've seen the worst of the 20th century? On one side, the communist USSR v capitalist USA. Hoorah! The tension's about to blow sky high at the Potsdam Conference 1945.
Yes, history showing that. First off, so cool the production levels. They got made some set. It looks like it's at a nuclear reactor or something, but espionage was big. Brought up Potsdam Conference. Basically, the Cold War basically began even before World War II ended, because all the different sides understood. Stalin and with the USSR, and then out west with FDR or Truman, depending on what time you're talking about when they're actually talking about Churchill, that sort of thing, all understood that this alliance is meant basically just to stop Hitler. They're not all hanging out on the weekends and having fun and partying and making plans for the relationship in the future that much, outside of what to do about Adolf Hitler and basically World War II. So this really started, and you saw that because they made deals with each other in these conferences at the end of the war, and a lot of these deals were not followed through.
We did it, Stalin. Chalked up a win, and we've each got a nice little piece of Berlin.
My victory, Truman. Your troops arrived late, but at least I've seized the Baltic states.
So you're gonna pull back? Time to take stock?
That's what he said.
Are you jealous of my Eastern Bloc? So you want Russian help to defeat Japan?
Well, actually, I've got an explosive plan.
The Potsdam Agreement.
So, good stuff there. He's getting into it, but Stalin always wanted to make sure everyone understood. Okay, he didn't have problems with this after the war, that Russia was the one paying the most in World War II. When you look at casualties and stuff like that, he's totally right, with these lives just being shed as they're fighting on their own in the East without being able to ally with anybody else. And one of the agreements that they had made, that Stalin had basically made at these conferences, was that you can see in the map here that the USSR took over all these states, and that the agreement was that they would be able to hold free elections. And basically the Soviets would pretty much leave. And none of that ever took place. And that's where you get into Stalin's argument that he needs to have more strength in Europe because Russia has now been invaded twice by Western Europe. And it's a pretty strong point there. And that was a deal too, that part of that deal, if he was to agree, with these agreements that the United States wanted help from Stalin in Japan, and he said, well, you got to do an invasion on land. You guys got to invade mainland Europe, which ended up being D-Day.
Split Germany and Austria into 4 occupied zones as an Iron Curtain fell across Europe.
Churchill
This was the only
used
time
that name.
Truman and Stalin met face to face.
Yeah.
Just 1 week after the conference, Truman unleashed America's top secret nuclear weapons on Japan without informing Stalin.
And that, actually, let me finish the line.
Fueling mistrust between the former allies.
This is George Kennan.
Okay, yeah. It was pretty weird when you really think about it in the end, that The United States had already made this deal with Japan that, right, they're going to take care of Hitler in Germany, and then they would go to Japan. And it looked like, from all accounts, that the Russians were doing that. They were moving in troops. They were starting to get ready to fight, and actually were even starting to do that a little bit. But then the United States goes ahead and drops these atomic bombs really before the Russians were even able to mount their total threat. And that has been one of the criticisms of the bomb, is they made this deal already, but it never adds, the United States never uses the Soviet Union in this case. Now, you can add in other motivations for the atomic bombs, which we don't really need to get into right now. But when you look at the devastation that would happen in May and June with Iwo Jima, Okinawa, that it made the idea of having any kind of really invasion of Japan, even with the Soviet Union, not something worth doing.
Reporting from Moscow, ma'am. Eyes only for Truman. A long telegram. It must be America's firm intention to contain Soviet global aggression.
This is Novikov reporting from United States. Tell Stalin we must spend whatever it takes. The US are clearly laying foundations for total global domination.
Kennan's long telegram influenced the
Who's to
Truman
say who was
Doctrine
right,
and
huh?
Marshall Plan, which provided aid to countries threatened by Soviet communism.
Yep.
The US sent aid to Turkey and Greece, but when they tried to introduce the Deutschmark in Germany, Stalin blockaded supplies to West Berlin. Cue the Berlin airlift.
Yeah. So I'm hoping you came here for the history context, right? Unlike what happened in World War I, where basically they just made Germany, signed a treaty, and then left them be for the most part, they weren't doing that in World War II. So the four major allies, France, United States, Russia, and Britain, each took occupation zones in Germany. And even Berlin itself had occupation zones because they wanted to oversee that. And that brought, unfortunately, these tensions very close to each other, as these zones kind of became little guinea pig areas where each different side could kind of show their best face. And with this tension, because Berlin was inside of the eastern part of Germany that the Soviets controlled, the Soviets were very concerned about what, especially America, was doing in Berlin, which again is within a Soviet-controlled sector, which leading to the closing off of Berlin that the Soviets did to the Western nations, leading to this whole Berlin airlift.
Look up, Stalin. You can block the roads, but the Brits are plying it with peaceful payloads.
Good on you, mate. How about some credit for the US, Aussie, Kiwi and Canadian
We've been
effort?
dropping 9,000 tons of supplies a day, mostly coal and potatoes, hardly gourmet. Now find me a runway.
Something,
I
right?
need to hit the ground.
Hey, you can head home, mate. Stalin's just back down.
What?
The Allies flew in vital supplies to West Berlin until Stalin backed down in May 1949. In the same year, the Western Allies formed NATO to counterweight Russia. But that winter, the balance of
The military
power was
alliance.
about to shift dramatically east.
Comrade, welcome to the Soviet Union, and kudos on your communist revolution.
And so a new era for China begins. I need good news to take back to Beijing.
An alliance together, if I may say so, would surely put it right up NATO.
Let's renew the Sino-Soviet alliance.
Agreed. Now, you like rocket science?
So you could see with the hostilities, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, ends up being the military alliance with the major Western powers. So if there is going to be a World War III, you basically have the battle lines. You have the alliance system out there. You had alliances in World War I, you had an alliance system in World War II, and you can see when that alliance was made, the Soviet Union took that threat very seriously and attempted to make their own. They're going to make the Warsaw Pact, which is those other communist states in East Europe, and then try to get something going with China. And one thing, we'll see if they get to it, is it doesn't go very well. Mao, Stalin had a lot of different ideas, and this alliance, which scared the crap out of the West to see China, the biggest country in the world, and the Soviet Union becoming allies, that was nerve-wracking.
Stalin and Mao renewed the Sino-Soviet alliance, presenting a seismic shift in geopolitics. What's more, the USSR secretly tested their first nuclear weapon. Both superpowers began spreading their influence
4 years after the US
backing a
did.
complex web of competing governments and rebel groups until tensions crystallized on the Korean peninsula.
Okay, boys, it's good to see you. The commies are backing North Korea, so we'll be supporting our troops on the ground.
Getting up close to the speed of sound.
All right, now remember, it's a UN mission. We're part of a Western coalition
But no one showed up.
protecting the South. You got that, Briggs? Yes, sir. Time to bag me a MiG.
All right, so basically the U.S. policy was trying to be, they think, sensible. And it was this. All right, accept the fact communism exists. It exists in Eastern Europe. It exists now in China. Okay, there's really nothing you can do about that. So you have this idea of like containment policy, which was, okay, communism can exist where it does, but if it spreads and is going to threaten democracies, at least that's kind of how they worded this, then especially the U.S. will intervene. And Korea was one of those places. So one of the big problems was these places that used to be Japanese occupied are now becoming like independent. But one thing the United States and Soviet Union was doing is in this post-imperial world where nations are vacating their former colonies, the United States and the Soviet Union wanted these new countries to basically pick a side. Right? You're going to support and be part of kind of communist sentiments, or you're going to be a capitalist nation. And it's like you had to choose one or the other. And so some of these places, that decision was highly debated, right? A place like Korea had that, where you had influence from like China or the Soviet help, and then you had like South Korea, which United States would love to have as like an ally and a partner that way. And this is where you get the heating up of the Cold War, is these indirect things where United States and Soviet Union are going to fight each other, but they will fight proxy wars. And interestingly, because this is not the only time the UN did this, which was, all right, if a place can't decide which government it's going to adopt, then split it in two and make two countries. And that was the idea here in Korea. It happened with Vietnam. It was like, all right, we'll use a line of latitude here. They use the 48th parallel latitude line. And it's like, all right, you can be the communist state, you can be the South, and then nobody mess with that. And in both of those cases, no, you saw one side trying to push the other.
Korean War hit a stalemate until an armistice began in 1953. North and South Korea were split along the 38th parallel.
Did I say 39th?
Still divides the country today. Over the next
Yeah.
decade, tensions escalated
Never ended.
further, and the
Korean War, if you didn't know, has technically never ended. They're at a ceasefire and have been so for decades. It's technically a war still going on 60 years later.
It became truly global. Are you paying attention?
Yes.
Let's go. Stalin died and Truman lost power. In come Khrushchev and Eisenhower. The Warsaw Pact plans the Eastern Bloc, but the Russian and Chinese bond is rocked.
Yeah.
In 56, the Hungarian uprising is smashed by the Russians. The world's realizing that these superpowers crush those who oppose. As the CIA ruthlessly hunts in the shadows, the space race makes for a dazzling sideshow. As Khrushchev cranks up the pressure from Moscow in the Berlin crisis, you probably guessed they put up a wall to split East and West. And just before you begin to relax, an island off Florida has just unpacked a lethal
Cuba
arsenal of Soviet nukes. The world's hottest breath, and I'm gonna puke.
So people say this was the closest the United States Soviet Union ever got to nuclear war, which is kind of, unfortunately, it's a scary thought. People thought that war would never be like what it was in World War I and World War II, these large armies of millions like that. No, now that the atomic weapon has been developed and multiple nations now have it, that's how wars are going to be fought. Right now, the big grievance that not a lot of people know about when it comes to the Soviet Union was that Turkey, like they talked before, United States was trying to prop up Greece and Turkey and their governments that would become allies. And a place like Turkey was a very valuable strategic positioning to have an alliance like that with the United States because of its proximity to Russia. Anyway, the United States had nuclear weapons and put them in Turkey, and the Soviets were obviously not very happy about that because that meant that they had nuclear weapons within striking distance. Okay, because at that time you still had to be very close to a nation to be able to deliver a bomb by rocket. So the Soviets are like, well, if you can have one in Turkey, we should be able to have one with an ally near you. Enter Cuba, which is 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And the Americans, maybe it's hypocritical, were like, no, you don't get to do that. And the Soviets are like, what? What do you mean? If you can do it, we can do it, right? Nope. But so we can see there's an issue there because the Americans have to realize too that, okay, you can't expect something different from your enemy than they would of yourself. And fortunately, after the Cuban Missile Crisis is going to be called, things did de-escalate.
My fellow Americans, as a Soviet mover to put a boatload of nukes on the island of Cuba, it would appear that Moscow is
supposed to be Kennedy.
Lies, and I will not stand idly by. Now I know what you're thinking. Last year wasn't great. The Bay of Pigs was a big mistake, but after careful thought, the decisions be made. We'll stop Moscow ships with a naval blockade.
The President Kennedy and the CIA were trying to help support a coup to take out Fidel Castro. Of course, was a communist and had ties to the Soviet Union, and that failed, which made the Americans look very bad, as they actually tried to hide their involvement and say it wasn't them, but it did get uncovered that it was, so it wasn't going very well with this.
For 13 days, the world held its breath as Washington and Moscow communicated via unreliable back channels. Despite some close calls, Khrushchev agreed to remove the weapons if Kennedy removed his own missiles from
Only
Turkey.
fair, right?
Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, an ill-advised proxy war was growing out of control.
Nam?
Well, good morning, Vietnam. Lit by furious 5 napalm, scarred by a million poodle shells. A jungle paradise, turn to hell. And is this battle really ours? Where's the just within this cause? America, elephant scared by a mouse drawing lines in the sand when the tide is out.
For 2 decades, the US fought a futile war against communist-backed North Vietnam until the US withdrawal. In 1972, President Nixon traveled to Beijing and Moscow, holding talks to limit the arms race during a period known as détente. However, in 1979, Cold War tensions would ratchet up once more.
So yeah, the Vietnam War has some parallels with the Korean War, right? Whereas this idea, okay, Vietnam had the same thing. They were going to be split up. There was going to be a communist government and then a more capitalist type of government. And same thing happened. You didn't really have that. It was seen as like an artificial divide of these countries, and different sides wanted to see unification that way. And neither war, ends up going real well for, especially the Americans, because the Korean War, all they were able to do was basically get a ceasefire at the line, which the nations were basically divided up. And then it was a failure for the Americans in the other part, in the Vietnam War, because eventually the communist regime does take over the entire area there. So, but yeah, these are examples of containment policy and wars based off of that.
Sir, we just got word from Afghanistan, a communist coup.
Sounds like a Soviet plan.
Yes, sir. The Russians are sending advisors. Clearly, they're trying to undermine us.
So let's support the other side.
The Islamist fighters.
Yeah, that sounds fine. Encourage them to fight a holy war with the Soviet Union.
Well, if you're sure.
This is something very few Americans understand that. So you got Russia, which had been interested in Afghanistan for a long time. They used to fight the British back when the British Empire was still a thing, for Afghanistan, for that territory. And now the British they've left and all that. Afghanistan was a place they were trying to pressure into and try to get a regime going there, a Soviet supported one. But you did have a resistance inside of Afghanistan. And basically with the Americans, it was, hey, enemy, my enemy's a friend. Doesn't matter who you are. If we have a common enemy, we're gonna work together. And this is gonna be the Mujahideen. And interesting thing about this is some of these Islamic fundamental kind of Islamic fighters from around the Islamic world actually go into Afghanistan to go and help fight in this, because they do see it as, again, kind of a holy war. They think it's a pushing more imperialism on their culture, and saw it as a holy war. And what ends up happening out of this too is this is going to be a failure for the British. Afghanistan is kind of like the Soviet Union's Vietnam, in that they tried to instill these policies down there, and ends up failing, and ends up hurting in the end too, because a lot of these fighters that ended up going and fighting them there become extremists after, and some of these people that got this experience end up creating groups like Al Qaeda and stuff like that, which again becomes kind of interesting, because that then becomes an enemy of the United States, and with Osama bin Laden and things like that. So it's kind of interesting, United States almost having a role in creating or emboldening an enemy that they thought they had a common enemy with, but once that was over, turns against them.
The Soviet Union sent thousands of troops to support the Communist Party in Afghanistan, but they failed to defeat local Mujahideen fighters backed by the USA. In 1987, Gorbachev
weapons,
and Reagan
training,
signed a
all that
treaty to limit nuclear weapons as the Soviet economy began to fail. And in 1989, the eyes of the world turned to Berlin.
We are sick of silence. We will not rest. Berlin has won, not east and west. If there's one thing of which I'm certain, it's time to end this iron curtain.
We must destroy this brutal vision, this ugly symbol of division. East and West, join the call. Hey, Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Famous saying by President Reagan. Berlin kind of ended up being where the microcosm of the whole Cold War, because it was because Americans have presence there in West Berlin, and of course the Soviets in East Berlin, and it's where they were really the closest and would put their best face on. And this wall that ends up being created, Nikita Khrushchev built this wall because, well, a lot of reasons, but one reason being that the East Side was not doing so well in the build-up after the war, and a lot of people actually moving to the West. And a wall was a way to keep people in from moving, because a lot of people, I forget, a couple million or something defected from East to West in Berlin, and but was supposed to be seen by the Soviet side as a protection from a potential invasion if the like America wants to take over the city of Berlin. So walls do two things, right? Keep people out, keep people in.
89,
so this was a huge moment.
Down, and Eastern Europe stood its ground with a sweeping wave of revolutions against their Soviet institutions. Finally, after 50 years of proxy wars and nuclear fears, the world began to heal the scars of countless battles near and far. And present day, fast forward the clock, we're still living with the aftershock. This global war for domination affected almost every nation. So don't assume this war was cold, that it didn't take a human toll. For the millions who died for their nation states, let us learn from their fate.
Click here to subscribe.
Do they got a jet?
Click here for a behind-the-scenes video. Click here for award-winning online history resources.
I need to check that out. I gotta check out the classroom resources. This would be cool to show if kids, would be into that. Fortunately, it does take certain kids to really get into this kind of stuff, but it would work better in like an AP class or something like that. Well, this was great, man. The production value. I don't know who's producing this financially and stuff like that, but to get these awesome sets and things like this, so much work there. And again, the cinematography is so cool. Them trying to film it kind of on one take. It truly is impressive. But as an avid history teacher, I love the content and how they just brought up information and weren't necessarily trying to they were just trying to tell the history, more than anything, rather than maybe influence sides or something like that much. And that's very useful and good for thinking stuff like that. But this was enjoyable, man. What a great crew of people that are putting these together, these history of things in one take. And it's really talented. The beats are great. The rhymes are good. I think it's fantastic. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this again, patrons that were nominating and voting for this video here. So I don't know, I put in some thoughts in there. I got a bunch of other videos. If you're looking for more reaction videos on the Cold War, check them out. There's Oversimplified. Some other channels, I forget which ones specifically that had some Cold War stuff. There's plenty of that going on. If you want to talk about the Cold War, come over to our Discord community. We got a good 7,000 people that love to talk about stuff, and Cold War is one of the topics that a lot of people seem to be into. But you can always talk about that too. Just go to the link in my description, and you can join that as well. All right, and again, the link to the original video is also down below. Make sure you check that out. Give them the love they do. Thanks for being a part of this and checking out the video today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.